here for another Art at Noon, today on art and the climate crisis. For anybody, if this is your first Zoom with us here at PAFA, I'm Abby King, the Assistant Director of Adult Programs here at PAFA. And I'm so excited because today I have a co-host and she's one of my favorite colleagues. So I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Susanna Fishman. I'm the manager of pre-college programs, which means I work with teens. I'm going to do a shameless plug right now. We're registering, we have spots open in our teen programs, including some really cool new ones, including on the art of surviving the apocalypse and public art in America. So both very topically related to this. Those classes are free and teens can earn college credits in them. So if you have any teens in your life, check it out. I also want to say a big thank you to our members for coming out and supporting us today and every day. If you have not joined yet, please consider it. There's a lot of really neat perks. So we'll have some time in the end for questions. So if you have any questions throughout, please drop it into the chat. I will, there's that chat. Lost it for a second. The chat is right there. You're welcome to use it at any point, but we're going to give Cindy a chance to share her great talk before we get to questions. And then just a few things about Zoom for those of you who are new to this. We're going to ask that people stay muted throughout the program. Cindy's going to be sharing her PowerPoint, and as I said, we'll have time at the end for questions. You might notice that this program is being recorded so that people who are not able to be here can enjoy it. However, you will not show up on the recording unless you speak. It only records speakers. So if you're on here and on mute, no one will know that. So I think that's it for me. Abby?
Yeah, of course. And I'll drop a link in the chat to our YouTube channel. So that the video of this program, if you know anyone who's missed it, will be up in the next couple days. So you're welcome to check that out. And I'll also share a link to Susanna's amazing teen programs if you want to know more information about those. I wish I was the teen so I could take the one on public art, but anyway. Anyways, so I do want to turn this over and introduce our speaker in just a second, but I really want to take a second to thank the folks that helped make this program happen. This program has a long-term sponsorship. The fall Art at Lunch lectures have been supported by the Barron family in memory of Rose Susan Hirshhorn Barron, a former docent at the Academy and a great supporter of its education programs. So I'm so pleased to thank the Barrons for their ongoing support in keeping this program free for the last, I think, 15 plus years. So thank you all so much. And I think at least one of you is here with us today. But it's now my pleasure to hand it over to our speaker. Art historian Cynthia Haveson Veloric is a researcher, writer, curator, and environmental advocate. She is a PhD candidate at the University of the Arts, and I'm so pleased to have her with us today. I know she's presented at PAFA many times. This is her first time with us on Zoom. So I'm now going to turn it over, Cindy, to you to take it away.
So, yeah. Here we go. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you all see the screen? That's the important thing. Thanks for zooming in. A more complete title for my lecture than the one that was used in the advertising is Emotions, Senses, Intellects, Experientiality, How Eco-Artists Are Creating Consciousness Around Climate Change. So these are the things that interest me in my research. You know, how do they actually affect us and change our perceptions about this oh so important topic? I'm trying to, I think I have to go to, can't seem, there we go. I'm going to start with a brief look at some current veins of eco art which relate to climate change. And then I'm going to look more closely at a couple of particularly highly visible artists working in the field. So I'm going to start with whales. Why whales? Well, because global warming is affecting the temperature and the acidity of the oceans, causing new patterns of migration, feeding habits, and lifespans. And those dangers also intersect with the amount of plastic debris in the ocean. And whales are these behemoths, and this particular behemoth whale, blue whale, made of recycled plastic, draws our attention to the presence of eco art in the public sphere. I happened to see this whale in person last year and was pretty much blown away on a emotional and visceral level. It holds the Guinness World Record for the largest recycled plastic sculpture. And I feel that this demonstration of eco art would not necessarily even have been possible 10 years ago. I mean, this particular piece was commissioned by governments. It was a collaboration between the Monterey Bay Aquarium, the National Park Service, and the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. So keep that in mind, that environmental art or eco art or ecological art is now more part of the mainstream. Moving halfway across the world, I saw another installation about sea life and its inhabitants. And this is Joan Jonas's Moving Off the Land installation, which was part of the Venice Biennale last year. Ironically and sadly, shortly after I saw this exhibition, Venice experienced its worst flood in 50 years. And there were a couple of exhibits and installations relating to sea rise. And sure enough, it happened right in Venice, the highest that they had seen in 50 years. Moving Off the Land is an epic portrayal of intelligent life beneath the sea. And it's a sort of a dreamy drama of our symbiosis with other species. Jonas, in this work, makes us care deeply about the fragility and feelings and necessities and dependencies and potential extinction of sea life due to climate change. I'm going to play a little clip of one of her video projections and maybe have a little fun with such a serious topic. I apologize for the sound quality or the quality of the videos. It's difficult to embed videos into Zoom presentations, so just bear with it. So, sorry. So, Jonas delivers, I think, successfully a message of ecosophy, which is a philosophy of ecological harmony or equilibrium with non-human life forms, organic life forms of all sorts. This intersects with a notion of environmental philosopher Timothy Morton that we inhabit a world of He calls them strange strangers, creatures that we may never fully know, but that we should try to know and understand and feel empathy for. And that we're all part of something that he calls the entangling mesh. We all inhabit this universe together, and we have to be respectful of one another. But it's not only animals and aquatic life that suffers from our altered biosphere. We humans are assaulted daily by smog, foul polluted air, loud unnatural sounds, accumulated trash, e-waste, VOCs, etc. Scientists use graphs, diagrams, and numbers to convey this information. Journalists use words and bold headlines to warn us. Scholars debate definitions of the Anthropocene or the Anthropocene, which is the proposed new term for the geological epoch that we are living in. And they want to change the epoch because they feel that human incursions or intrusions into the land and the way that the land has been used and abused is causing a new fossil record. And even economists are weighing in now, pondering and weighing in on the market and investments in a climate changed world. But these strategies of discourses seem at a far remove from our daily lives. And it is really the artists who have a much greater ability to affect public perception of environmental issues. Artists have a unique ability to communicate complex messages in other registers of experience. And you're going to see me return to the words over and over again: emotion, experience, perception, the senses. And that's what artists can do that these other discourses cannot do. They immerse themselves in the problem physically, morally, intellectually, often traveling to places where climate change is most easily seen. So they use their own emotions and visceral understanding to relate the issues to us. And as I said earlier, the work is often created in public, either created outside in the public sphere or installed in the public sphere so that it promotes conversation. More and more artists have social practice as part of their artistic practice, where they go around and lecture on their art and on the issues. Olafur Eliasson has been creating drastic interventions in the public sphere for decades now. And, you know, he's even gotten into conceiving and producing these little sun solar-powered lamps, which he here uses in a great presentation for Earth Day last year. Diane Burko has been working on coral reef, the devastation of the coral reefs around the world, and here she's visiting the Hawaiian Institute of Marine Biology so that she is bearing witness not only to the phenomenon, but she's really understanding through scientific labs and the scientists themselves what exactly is going on. Artists have even gone so far as to tattoo themselves with the global warming index. That's Justin. We'll return to him in a little while. Wow, you know, what an emotional punch this packs. An exhibit from 2 years ago at the Biennale, you know, holding up this old venerable hotel against air pollution, rising sea levels, all kinds of ecological damage. And this artist is, I think, making the point that we may have to take our plants with us and create mobile gardens, because, you know, plants, flora and fauna, they're not going to be able to exist in the habitats where they are now naturally as the climate changes. A lot of the art that speaks up against fossil fuels is performative. I just think this is a really interesting example of that. Pretty dramatic. And I want you to know it's in Australia, and you know, climate art is something that is proliferating around the world. It knows no boundaries, just like global warming itself. So for a bit of context here, current environmental art or eco art was foreshadowed by the land and environmental art movements of the late 1960s on. And I show you two women pioneers of environmental art. And I'm gonna, as I mentioned women, I just wanna pull a little plug for my upcoming session at the College Art Association is all going to be about the history of women artists in climate change. And I think it's important for us to know that the College Art Association, which is the largest art organization of its kind in the US, I believe, is devoting a third of the session topics to climate change, which is truly remarkable and probably overdue, but you know, happy to know that that is going to be the focus. So I was mentioning land art, Agnes Denes and Mary Miss's work here. PAFA owns, I believe, some Agnes Denes work. And these two artists were responding to Lower Manhattan's sprawl, artifice, and landfill, and sort of gifting city dwellers with these artfully created sites in which to relax and contemplate and gaze over water, and like turning away from urban sprawl essentially and turning to the land and the environment and just trying to reconnect with it and, you know, truly enjoy those moments. As a side note, the wheat on the left was harvested, I understand. I don't know where it went, but it fulfilled a function as well as just being aesthetically beautiful. So since the early 2000s, though, an increasing number of artists have turned specifically to the issue of climate change. And I think part of that broader awareness partially came about due to two pivotal events in 2006. One was the release of Al Gore's film, An Inconvenient Truth, and the other was the publication of Elizabeth Colbert's book, Field Notes from a Catastrophe. And I know, for example, in Diane Burko's case, she told me that that was a turning point for her when she left focusing solely on large geographical phenomenon and panoramic views, which she had always painted. And it inspired her with a new mission, and that was to start to paint the visible effects of climate change. She went back and looked at some of her earlier work that she had painted of snow-capped mountains in Europe and elsewhere, and asked the question to herself, I wonder if the snow is still there? And you know, it was such an important question for her. And then she began to devote time to this issue. And you can see she often does paintings in series, and you can see the snow disappearing. Now, rather than relying on satellite imagery, which she had done for many years, she decided to bear witness in person to some of these sites. And here is a 4-part painting that she did up in the Arctic, or she did after she returned to her studio. But Diane artfully combines scientific data and artistic license in her work. And she presents beauty and lures us in with that, and then gives us bits of data and scientific information that she weaves in. More recently, she's turned to the disappearing of the coral reefs. So she's gone from the Arctic to the tropical in her investigations. And here again, we see a mix of the data from the NOAA maps and charts, red, of course, indicating heat. And then she translates those notions of hot and cold into her work, which looks relatively abstract there at the bottom with some references to charts and keys. So Diane, in this work, for me anyway, is able to shock the viewer sort of simultaneously into terror and cognition of global warming. Another plug for PAFA people, I wanted to mention the Dufala brothers, who I believe started out as students at PAFA. And this is one example of an interrogation into the proliferation of plastics in our ecosystem. And if you just look at the work from afar on the left, you look at the big picture, you're not quite sure what you're looking at. It's called fog, so we may imagine some murkiness in the atmosphere, but when we zoom in on the close-up, on the detail, we see that that fog is composed of plastic bottles. The Dufala brothers have instituted a remarkable nonprofit institution in Northeast Philadelphia called RARE, Recycled Artist in Residency Program. It's located on a construction and demolition recycling center, which I was lucky enough to be able to visit last year. And it's really quite an unusual place in that there's all this debris and trash and scrap metal. And then they select an artist or two each year to make something of that waste stream and convert it. And the studios are inside. And this is an example of one of the artist's exhibitions with the materials collated from that demolitions, the recycling center. So the mission is quite important. It illuminates the connections between art, industry, and sustainability. And it makes us and the artists reconsider materials and the waste stream. Veteran artist Mel Chin has been incorporating eco-activism into a variety of installations and designed objects for several decades. This piece, I can't really call it a piece, it's more like a mega installation that was in Times Square, becomes through the use of artificial reality and VR, becomes a multi-sensory experience where the viewers gaze up at what would be the water level 20 feet above them. You see the floating ships on the right, and on the left, what looks like the remains or almost the fossils of an old ship that would have sunk beneath the water. And there are some more connections and different layers about this resembling Jenny Lind, who was one of the first entertainers, songstress in America. And this is Times Square, of course, the mecca for entertainment. And there's a lot of levels here, but essentially he tries to change our cognizance of what New York City and Times Square would look like under 20 feet of water. Pretty awesome. Olafur Eliasson has brought awareness to the Northern Hemisphere's melting glaciers by means of disruption and displacement. We are caught off guard when we see something from nature out of context, especially at grand scale. In Ice Watch here, which was concurrent with the 2015 climate accords in Paris, he displayed large chunks of a glacier that had broken off from Iceland's largest glacier. Here's another iteration of it in London the year before. Here, knowledge is gained about melting glaciers through the displacement of the ice, which is itself a beautiful aesthetic object as it changes shape as it melts, it changes color throughout the day. It has, you know, different chroma, different hues, different shadows. And there's also a performativity around the ice. Like people, I've seen many photographs of people interacting with the ice. They've danced around it. I've actually saw someone licking the ice, kissing the ice, touching the ice. So, you know, it is an experiential cognizance or an experiential empathy with what's going on with the glaciers. It's a way of bringing this incredibly important phenomenon to people in cities, you know, further south. So for my dissertation, I'm analyzing 4 typologically different practices which share an overriding concern with the visible effects of climate change and also the human activities that lead to it. So these 4 artists address mining, oil extraction and production, the burning of fossil fuels, and ocean pollution. And I believe that the aesthetics in each one of these practices plays a crucial role in shaking off, you know, any sense of complacency or apathy about the issues. By forcing us to acknowledge loss, damage, destabilization, potential illness, potential violence inherent in polluting endeavors, they provide a kind of rupture. They shake us out of our field of normal experience and really force us to engage with the topics, to perhaps re-examine our own views, our own behaviors, and hopefully cause us to change our actions. So the 4 artists are, on the left, the Lithuanian group. Their names are very difficult to pronounce. I'll go with just their first names. Rugile, Vaiva, and Lina. On the right, upper right, we have the work of Justin Bryce Guariglia. Lower left, we have the work of Michael Pinsky, and lower right, the work of Edward Bertinsky. So let's start with the Sun and Sea Pavilion, part of the Venice Biennale, winner of the Lion d'Or, the Golden Lion Award. So extremely prestigious. I think the 3 of them were astounded that they won. And I was able to speak to the curator and the director of the piece. And the curator said, well, I submitted it because I thought it was just weird enough that it might succeed. That was her words, weird. And the director, Rugile, actually said that she didn't want to take a position, a real position on climate change, that she wanted to let the work speak for itself and let people bring different interpretations to it. But I feel that their stance of neutrality was truly not met by a neutral affect. And people came out of there feeling extremely moved, upset, emotional. So this is what it looked like from the balcony, and visitors are forced literally to go up to the balcony to view it from above. It relays a message about how humans interact pretty superficially with climate change. I mean, they may not even realize that they are daily helping to produce climate change through the objects they use. Like, these people are all surrounded by toxins, and the products that surround them embody toxins like plastics, textiles, aluminum, petroleum. They may not realize that the sun has burned a hole in the ozone layer, that they're getting burned and more susceptible to cancer. And we recognize ourselves and our human vulnerabilities in them. So it is an opera, if I mentioned that, it's an opera, it's theater. People come and go in the set, if you call it a set. And it is also sort of this interesting, I learned a term called ecotone, which in biology has to do with a merging of two different kinds of bodies of water, and where they meet, like salt water and fresh water. It's called an ecotone. In this sort of theater ecology, there's an ecotone between the actors and between the actors and the audience above. And in fact, spectators are invited to participate. If they sign up in advance, they can actually be part of the scene on the beach. So I'd like to play you a short clip. Unfortunately, again, the sound quality is not great, but I hope you get a sense of the opera. And I've selected a little portion, and I've got the lyrics on the left and the young twins, they're singing on the right. And I know it was probably hard to find the twins when they were singing, but they were in there. And by the way, the actors and the singers change every couple weeks. And again, the audience can come and go. There's a great deal of spontaneity in the piece, and that was intended to make us perhaps be able to relate more to it than having a formal. And I mean, in one way, the work is distance in that you're looking down at it from a balcony, and you're looking down at humans as a species almost, or as the director said, almost like insects. You're looking down on tiny microscopic species, but at the same time, there is a lot of interaction. So the next one I want to look at is the pollution pods of Michael Pinsky. These geodesic domes, of which the first iteration was in Norway, are situated here next to the UN during the climate summit last year. The interior of the pods simulate the samples of air pollution of 5 international cities. And it has been touring the world. When it was in New York, the one and only Greta Thunberg had the opportunity to visit the pollution pod. And that's, the artist is next to her on the left. Michael is an urban planner, sculptor, and activist. You know, very intent on changing people's minds and behaviors through multisensory experiences, immersion, and he provides what I consider ambiguity in the brain, because the pods beckon us with their, pleasing shapes, and we're sort of fascinated, what are they made of, exactly what are they? And then when we enter, we are confronted with this incredibly foul smelling, clammy, quite unpleasant, hazy atmosphere. So, you know, you go from appreciating the beauty of the forms to sort of shock and disgust. I don't know if I mentioned all 5 cities. One was Tatra, Norway, which had the clean air. And this was where he first conceived of it. He simulated the air from Norway. And then you progress into more and more polluted atmospheres from London, New Delhi, Beijing, and Sao Paulo. So the point here for me, you know, how this succeeds is that this sense of immersion or experientiality is capable of creating meaning as well as cognitive understanding. So there are all different ways to understand a problem or to gain new forms of knowledge, and artists help us do that. Michael's also interested, as many artists across the world are, conveying the sea change heights. And by encircling some of these venerable old monuments in London with blue neon light, he draws our attention to what the city might look like under, you know, 20 feet of water, 30 feet of water in decades to come. Quite dramatic. He also uses light in this installation, light and color. Cars are a nemesis to him. The fumes that they emit, you know, the noxious emissions and traffic are a huge problem in London, all across the world, London in particular, where he lives. And I think this is a very clever sort of circular argument for how car emissions help create climate change. And then when the climate change comes in the forms of rising water, you know, he's got the cars submerged in the water. So for me, this sort of shows the full circle of cause and effect of climate change. Often his installations are accompanied by sound as well. Justin Guaraglia, pretty hot artist now in New York, maintains that he is open to trying any material or method to bring the reality of climate change to the masses. So he's all about accessibility, and he's been pondering the ways in which he can do that best. So he's heavily influenced by environmental philosophers like Timothy Morton and Bruno Latour. And he's also interested in what writers have to say and what indigenous voices of impacted communities have to say. And he takes their sayings, or he takes like pithy aphorisms or poignant quotes, and he places them on these highway signs. And there's certainly an element of surprise when you come upon one of these things in totally unexpected places. For example, the Chicago Navy Pier here. This exhibit is called We Are the Asteroid. So, you know, one sign is one thing, but when you install 9 of them in a completely incongruous place, such as the courtyard of the Somerset House in London, I feel they have even more of an impact. And, you know, one voice is joined by a chorus of global voices to make the message more profound. And the viewer is forced to, you know, engage with the signs of all things. I mean, you know, you want to move from sign to sign, have time to think about what they're saying, and then hopefully engage with other viewers in the same space and talk about it. In his desire to appeal to people of different groups, different ethnicities, different language groups, when he installed We Are the Asteroid throughout New York, he even used different language according to the groups that proliferated in those areas. So here we have Spanish here and Chinese here. here's Justin working in his studio where he is transforming his photo imagery that he took from a NASA aircraft. He was the first artist allowed to fly in a NASA C-130. And they were doing missions over the Arctic, I think Greenland in particular. And he decided that the photos weren't enough in themselves to communicate climate change. And he said, no, I had to turn it into art. I had to do something more with it. And one of the ways he does that is by creating these multimedia, huge prints, using that large printer you see on the left. It's very rare, it's very expensive. And when I was there, actually other artists were there renting his piece of equipment. So it's a big deal that he has this. He's very proud of it. And he uses all kinds of interesting materials in his prints, but what surprised me was that he actually uses materials at times which are not environmentally friendly. And I, specifically queried him about that, and he said, that's precisely why I'm using them. He said, I'm trying to give a message about the noxious, non-biodegradable products in our biosphere and in our landfills. And he's a great proponent in his media usage of the philosopher Marshall McLuhan's dictum that the medium is the message. And he certainly is carrying that out in these large prints. The last artist I'm going to show you is Edward Burtynsky. And he's a Canadian, and he has made his reputation on exposing the scarred, wrecked landscape that results from heavy industry, manufacturing, mining, etc., deforestation. And he causes us to question, the tension between the capitalistic good life and how do we achieve that? Look at the material goods that we think we need and we use, and then stop to think about, well, wait though, the word goodness, is it good for us? But it's not good for the environment. And we need to re-examine our relationship with goods and services produced at the expense of the land. He gives us extremely dramatic images at times. Sometimes they're beautiful. They have been termed the toxic sublime because the images move us to awe or to terror or to astonishment. First, we're not quite sure what they are, but then when we read the labels, in this case, nickel tailings, which is the excess sort of runoff from mining ore, we realize really how terrible that is for the environment. And you can see, in fact, how it's burned and scraped and demolished the land around it. In this case, when we first look at this, we're thinking, what is that? They look like snails on steroids or something. They're so beautiful and interesting and abstract. But again, when we read the label, we see that this image is the result of underground mining, extensive mining, and of potash. And potash is a crop that, as you can read up there, and plant food. However, large spills can harm or kill vegetation. Not to mention the collapsing of mines that has happened around the world in all this extensive mining that's going on. So Burtynsky's methods and images allow for multiple readings of his photographs. Again, sublime beauty, fear, horror, empathy for the physical earth itself. His films, which are billed as documentaries and are entered into film festivals as such, for me are not just documentaries. For me, they're truly art, because he uses techniques such as long takes, aerial views, wide shots, the pacing of the images affects me emotionally and viscerally and experientially. I'm going to show you a clip in a minute of what I mean. And I apologize for, it's such a short clip, and the voice at the beginning, pay no attention to that voice, as the Wizard of Oz said to Dorothy and Toto. Because what he says I've basically covered in my lecture today. But I want you to focus on the aesthetics of the film work and see how the images lure you in and stimulate your senses. And see if you can feel the power in the images and think about if they could possibly change your behavior, your daily behavior. I'll end with that and then take questions.
Such a fundamental change in the way the Earth is behaving, that we need to communicate that as powerfully as possible to everybody.
Thank you so much for a really fascinating and illuminating talk. I really appreciate it. So now we're open for questions. Cindy, also, if you want to maybe stop sharing your screen, it'll be possible to see everyone. So you're welcome to type questions into the chat, and I will pass those along, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question, as long as we can manage that. If that starts getting out of hand, then I will, if you want to share a question verbally, I'm just gonna ask you to type next into the chat so I can call on you. Any questions? Well, I have one. If other people aren't gonna speak up. Oh, I have one question from our student who was here early. BVA asked me, how was the ice transported for the installation that you shared?
Great question. By sea, and they have to, this is the irony, they have to use a tremendous amount of energy and add to the carbon footprint a lot of times in sharing their art with the world. And, you know, the artists don't ignore this issue. You know, they freely admit it, but very often they will say, A, it's worth it because I'm bringing the importance of this phenomenon to the world. And B, often they will purchase carbon offsets or purchase alternative energy credits and, you know, try to balance out their carbon footprint. Like a lot of them now, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but I've spoken to some who stopped flying. They don't want to, you know, contribute to airplane pollution. So yeah, I mean, that ice required a huge amount of refrigeration. You can imagine, to get it over to the United States, or it was shown once in the United States in a gallery in New York. It's also been shown in other places around the world.
Thanks so much. Someone else wanted to know if there was any other time that you can think of when artists had the opportunity to impact change of behavior on a contemporary problem.
All the time. Artists as activists goes back to Wow. I'm going to say, the earlier 20th century, maybe even before then. But I remember Picasso, let's just start with Picasso and Guernica. It was a protest against the Spanish Civil War, it had great impact. The artists of the social realist movement in America in the 1930s, the Russians. I mean, there are a lot of movements where art was a direct political statement. In this country, there were these happenings in the 60s and 70s, which were direct comments or protests about all kinds of problems that were reflected in, protest and books. And I mean, some other people might be able to weigh in more on, the history of political art in this country. But yeah, it's been going on a long time. Artists are always at the forefront, actually, of political and social issues. They have their own barometers, they have their own antennae, and they get it out there, usually quite successfully.
So going from the message to the consequence, someone asked how these works have changed your behavior, and if they have, and what behaviors you think they may cause other people to change.
Yeah, well, since I started working for the Clean Air Council several years ago as a volunteer, I've become, well, actually my environmental activism goes back to my teenage years in high school, where I organized a bottle drive. But I've been cognizant of this problem for a long time. I do what I can as an individual. I recycle, I compost, I try to limit car trips, I bundle together trips. I don't use plastic a lot. I always bring my own bag. I mean, these are things that all of us can do. You change out your light bulbs to change them out of incandescent to, LED or other kinds of light sources. What else do I do? I'm frugal in my purchases of things that are, one of my pet peeves is that with the pandemic, so many people are ordering more things online and having them delivered, and it drives me crazy. The truck transport and the amount of packaging that surrounds these tiny objects that are being delivered drives me absolutely crazy. So, I'm on a rampage all the time in my house with other members of my household ordering things because of the way that they are delivered and packaged.
All right, we're getting a lot of questions now. I want to tell people we're going to get to as many as we can. We could probably get to another 2 or 3, and if we don't get to you, you can always send them to myself or Abby. I'm actually going to give you her email since she'll be better for this, and we can always keep the conversation going. So the next question is, how have the restrictions of the pandemic changed expressions of the eco-artist?
Well, we talked a little bit about this before the session started, before the program started. I think more artists were forced to work in isolation. But although they couldn't necessarily display their art in public or in galleries or museums during the pandemic, I think this forced isolation or semi-isolation forced them to rethink their topics, how they're going to convey their messages. Perhaps the parallel message of pandemic and climate change are both perceived now as serious health concerns, global health concerns, and they may be rethinking how to present their climate change themed works to engage with the larger pandemic issues. Now, I personally haven't seen that much climate art out in the world right now since the pandemic began. I asked earlier if anyone in the audience had seen anything recently that's specifically related to climate change. It's just starting to pick up again. Museums are just starting to reopen. Galleries are just starting to reopen. So I know there was a gallery in New York. I can't remember the name right now, but they were showing women eco artists this past summer. I didn't get a chance to see that show, but that looked like it was a pretty powerful show online.
Great, thank you. A lot of the work you shared was really beautiful. And can you talk a little bit about how that beauty is used to convey some of these messages effectively?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most popular strategies, I'll say, when it comes to climate art. I mean, Diane's a great proponent of using beauty, and Edward Burtynsky as well, using that immediate sense of aesthetic beauty, drama, color, dynamism in the line, a sense of movement perhaps, all of that kind of beauty, formal beauty, what we call in art history formal beauty or formal characteristics, that all makes you stop in your tracks and look. Mm-hmm. And you can appreciate the aesthetics on just the sight sense, you know, through vision. But the more you engage with it, and then you maybe start reading the labels, or maybe you start reading some of the background about what the piece is really about, or maybe there are clues and little indicators in the work itself, which add more layers of meaning to it. And that's how it works, essentially. You're drawn in by the beauty, and then you ponder the message.
So we're getting a lot of great suggestions in the chat for other things to look at. So if anyone wants to take a peek, I think there's probably time for one more question, and I thought it was interesting. Are climate deniers using art to communicate their message, and how are they doing with that?
I actually haven't seen any climate denier art. Maybe that says something about the ethics and morals of artists in general. I haven't seen any. I've seen plenty of climate denial articles in the newspaper. Not plenty, I shouldn't say plenty, I've seen some. I think the scales tip more heavily on the acceptance of climate change at this point in time. But no, I haven't seen any climate denier art. Has anybody else?
I would like to just chime in that I don't think artists ever see things like that. They are for progress, for humanity, and for beauty and saving our planet. I've never heard of an anti-climate artist, ever.
Well, I think that says something really neat about this community of makers that we get to live in around the world. So that's wonderful. I think that's all the time we have for today, but thank you again so much, Cindy. This was fascinating. Thank you everyone who came and asked great questions and participated. This was really wonderful. This will also be posted on YouTube, so you can always watch it later or share it with anyone who couldn't make it.
Thanks everyone for coming. Sarah, are you going to sign off, Susanna?
I'll hang out till people